Michael Philip Jagger was born in Dartford, Kent on 26 July 1943. When he was 4 he met Keith Richards until they went into secondary schools and lost touch. But one day in 1960 they accidentally met on the Dartford train line and both realized that they had an interest in rock and roll combined with blues. Between 1960 and 1962 the Rolling Stones formed. It was comprised of Mick on lead vocal and harmonica, Keith Richards on guitar, Bill Wyman on bass, Charlie Watts on drums and Brian Jones on guitar. In 1964 they released their first album The Rolling Stones. Eventually in 1965 they had their first #1 hit in the UK with The Last Time, which was followed by I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Throughout 1966 to 1969 they toured the world with many great hits like Let's Spend the Night Together, 1967, and Sympathy for the Devil, 1968. But in 1969 Brian Jones committed suicide and Mick and Keith Richards were blamed for his death. But this fusion blew over and they got another guitarist to replace Brian and Mick Taylor. They released the album Let It Bleed, 1969, with the track Honky Tonk Woman. After they completed a North American tour Jagger finally went to star in Performance, 1970, as the retired rock star Turner. The film was released in August 1970 with Mick starring opposite James Fox, and Mick even had his first solo hit, which was the soundtrack to the film Memo from Turner. In 1971 the Rolling Stones came back with the album Sticky Fingers, which would be the most popular album they ever made. From this album there were songs like Wild Horses and Brown Sugar and were major hits all over the world. While this was happening, Bianca Jagger gave birth to Jagger's daughter Jade Jagger. Throughout the 70s the Rolling Stones made thousands of live performances and achieved endless record sales with hits like Angie, 1973, It's Only Rock and Roll, 1974, Hot Stuff, 1976, and Respectable, 1978. In 1974 Ronnie Wood had replaced Mick Taylor on guitar and Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood both played lead guitar. In 1980 Jagger divorced Bianca Jagger and went on to record and release Emotional Rescue with the Rolling Stones, and it was a platinum album. In 1981 Tattoo Ye was released and the group went on a major world tour, their first in 3 years, which filled stadiums in the US and arenas in Europe. After the tour ended in 1982 Jagger was starting to like other music. In 1983 the Rolling Stones recorded the album Undercover at the Compass Point in Nassau. But recording sessions didn't go well, as during this time Mick and Keith Richards were having arguments about the kind of music the group should be playing. Even though the album was a success, it seemed like the Rolling Stones were now going over the edge. In May 1984 Mick recorded State of Shock with the Jacksons, which led Mick wanting to try out a solo career. So in September he recorded his first solo album with guests like Pete Townsend and Jeff Beck. Shortly before the album was released the Rolling Stones decided to record their first album under a new Sony Records contract. Keith Richards didn't approve of the solo efforts, he wanted Mick to stick to the Rolling Stones. In July 1985 Jagger made his first solo live appearance at the Live Aid benefit concert in Philadelphia. The Rolling Stones were going to perform but decided not to as things weren't going well for them at the time. During 1986 Mick worked on his second solo album Primitive Cool, which he hoped would be a success, but this was not to be. However, his 1988 tour proved to be a success, selling out in Japan. But Mick accepted the fact that the only way to carry on with success was to get back with the Rolling Stones, so in January 1989 he and Keith Richards reformed and they wrote songs for what was to be the Steel Wheels album. After the album was released the Rolling Stones went on a major worldwide tour with special concerts at London's Wembley Stadium. Sadly though, in 1992 bassist of the Rolling Stones Bill Wyman announced his departure from the group, which was to be the following year. Even though the Rolling Stones were upset to see him leave, they accepted the fact that had been in there too long and they had to let go. Jagger released some more solo material during this time, but it wasn't such a success. In 1994 the Rolling Stones released the album Voodoo Lounge and they went back on tour. The first The Rolling Stones project without Bill Wyman. The tour was the biggest tour in rock history, raising over $300 million. As this tour was a success, they returned yet again in 1997 with the Bridges to Babylon album and tour, which lasted for 2 years, which was combined with the No Security live album and tour. After the tour was finished, Jagger's marriage was on the line as he had another child from a secret love affair. Soon after this was found out, the marriage between him and Jerry Hall had ended. Since then Jagger's been a film producer and a solo artist. He has produced the film Mad Ma Enigma, 2001, and has recorded his 2001 album Goddess in the Doorway, another commercial flop. But never fear, because just recently the Stones announced a 40th anniversary tour and that it will start in September 2002. When the Rolling Stones entered the music scene in 1962, non-invasive heart valve replacement surgery didn't even exist. Patients in Jagger's position would have had to endure traditional open-heart surgery, requiring anesthesia and putting them at greater risk for infection and other complications. On Wednesday, the Rolling Stones frontman shared a message on social media with his fans, writing that he was feeling much better after he announced he tested positive for COVID on Monday. "Thank you all so much for your well wishes and messages the last few days," Jagger, 76, wrote. "I'm feeling much better and can't wait to get back on stage next week. The Amsterdam date has been rescheduled for July 7 and we'll have news of the new Bern date ASAP. See you soon." When Jagger announced his test results, he also informed fans that the band's show in Amsterdam that night would be postponed. Mick Jagger tests positive for COVID and postpones Rolling Stones tour stop. I'm so sorry that we've had to postpone the Amsterdam show with such short notice tonight. I have unfortunately just tested positive for COVID," he wrote in a Twitter post Monday. "We aim to reschedule the date ASAP and get back as soon as we can. Thank you all for your patience and understanding. Mick." The band then wrote on Instagram that their frontman started exhibiting symptoms upon arrival at the stadium. On Tuesday, the band postponed their show scheduled for this Friday in Bern, Switzerland. The Rolling Stones are deeply sorry for this postponement, but the safety of the audience, fellow musicians and the touring crew has to take priority, the band said in a Twitter statement. The Satisfaction Rockers kicked off their European tour in Madrid on June 1, and it will wrap in Stockholm, Sweden on July 31. Last week, Jagger, Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood played in Liverpool, England in a show that had a very special member in the audience, Jagger's 5-year-old son Devereaux.